Thank you, Tom, and thank you to the entire CCA team. It's really such a pleasure to be here today. And I have to say that CCA has a very special place in my heart because when I was working in Maryland, first as the research director at the Higher Education Commission, it was the metrics that CCA put forward that showed us that we needed to be counting time to degree and credits to degree. We never even thought to ask the question, how long is it taking our students to finish? And when they actually do finish, how many credits have they accumulated? And then when I had the great privilege of serving as the Secretary of Higher Education in Maryland, Stan and the entire CCA team did everything they possibly could to both support me and to help completion become a top priority in my state. And so for that reason, I am very grateful for CCA and am especially honored to be here today. And what I'm really thrilled about is the work that you all have been doing over the last day. I haven't been here, but I have been following the discussion on Twitter, and I know that it's been a really exciting time. I'm thrilled about the compact that I was able to get a preview of a couple of weeks ago. And the reason why I think that compact is so exciting is because it casts a really strong signal of what the next generation of our completion work needs to look like and where we need to go for the next decade and 2 decades. Now, before we look forward, I want to take just a moment or so to take a quick look back. Think about it. Just 10 years ago, there wasn't a complete college America. And it's hard to even consider as we sit in this beautiful room with all of your state flags, and actually this room is kind of overwhelming and it's a little intimidating to be on this stage. But as we sit in this room and you are having this conversation that is singularly focused on college completion, to think that 10 years ago there was not a complete college America, that 10 years ago Lumina Foundation had just created what was then known as the Big Goal and what is now known as Goal 2025. And a decade ago, quite frankly, the national conversation around increasing opportunity in post-secondary education was actually still singularly focused primarily on increasing college access. And I see lots of head nodding, so I appreciate those nonverbal affirmations. Thank you very much. So to think about where we have come in just 10 short years is pretty amazing. And we should all be proud and grateful for that. In fact, after years of our attainment and completion rates pretty much remaining stagnant, now there are 4.2 million Americans who have those high-quality post-secondary credentials that we need them to have and that we need them to have in order to get to Goal 2025. So that's something that we should all really celebrate. Now, we can clap. Yeah. Let's clap for that. Now, it's a requirement that I ask this question, but how many of you know what Goal 2025 is? What Lumina Foundation's big goal or Goal 2025 is? Okay, are we taking notes? Lumina people, are we taking notes back there? Which hands got up? Okay. So I want to start just by putting the goal up there so that we all have the same kind of baseline of information. In 2008, we created the goal to kind of help direct the nation in a direction that we felt we needed to go, which was that at least 60% of Americans needed to have these high-quality post-secondary credentials. And as I said, after years of stagnancy, we've made some really good progress. And while we can celebrate that for just a moment, the reality is that we are not on track to get to Goal 2025. Yes, we've got 4.2 million more Americans with those high-quality credentials, but guess what? If we continue at the current rates of increases, we are still going to need 16.4 million Americans to get those high-quality credentials in order to get to goal 2025. And we're not going to make it if we keep doing things the same way that we've been doing them. So while we've made some positive changes, we've got to do so with a greater sense of urgency and with a renewed sense of commitment to this important work that we all believe in. So in October of last year, at Lumina Foundation, we released a new strategic plan. And when Tom sent me Complete College America's compact a couple of weeks ago, I literally almost jumped out of my seat because I was so thrilled at how closely aligned the scaling standards and the we believe statements were with those guiding principles that really led the development of Lumina's new strategic plan. And there were many things in our new strategic plan that we were uncompromising about, because we understand that as a private foundation, we have the opportunity to take some risks that others can't take, to say some things that only a private foundation might be able to say. And in some ways, we can set the agenda that perhaps others will be willing to follow. And so therefore, we wanted to be uncompromising about those things that we thought would help move the nation forward with a great sense of speed toward attaining Goal 2025. So, if together we believe, as you discussed yesterday, in the universal truths that are reflected in the CCA Alliance, that higher education is indeed a public good, that it's not something that people have to earn, that we all deserve it, if we believe that time is in fact the enemy, that too many students waste good time and good money, resources that many times they don't have, in part because the system fails them, not because they don't have the desire to pursue and to complete those credentials. If we believe that all students, not just my children, not just your children, not just those who have the means, but every single student should have a clear pathway to completion, and if we believe that we have the commitment and the will to make access and that we are going to follow up that will with intentions and hard work, then there are certain things that we think at Lumina we want to continue to partner with you on, and we think that those truths are also evident in our strategic plan. So what I did as I was thinking about my remarks is I went through the scaling standards and I tried to make very clear how they were reflected and articulated, perhaps using different language, but you can see them as you look at the work in Lumina's strategic plan. Now, the language that CCA uses is implementation, but what we say at Lumina is, yes, we believe in implementation, but a precursor to implementation is we think that the entirety of the post-secondary system needs to be redesigned to serve learners. We think that we need a system where learners, not post-secondary institutions, are at the center. We believe that a system has to be organized around learning, not time and not credit hours. We think that a true post-secondary system is one where competencies are the currency of learning. Now, this is important. We want students, we want learners to be on a pathway to a credential when they can demonstrate that they have learned something. Once they have shown mastery over material, over subject matter, then they should be able to move on to the next level, regardless of where or when that learning has occurred. If it's occurred in the workplace, if it has occurred in the military, or if it has occurred in the classroom setting. But right now, the system really does not allow for that in the ways that it should. Finally, we think that all learning should count, regardless of whether or not you are a traditional learner, regardless of whether or not you are a learner in a prison. If you receive true learning that can be validated, we want that to count toward a post-secondary credential. We understand that we're making perhaps some controversial statements here, but we think that this is in the best interest of learners, and we also think that this is what's needed to get the nation to Goal 2025. A couple of other things with regard to implementation. We don't think that we can do pilots anymore. There's no way that we can pilot our way to Goal 2025. So the days of piloting little projects for 5 or 10 years to see if it works are over, at least for Lumina Foundation. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't space for innovation. That doesn't mean that there isn't space for research and development. What that does mean is once we figure out that something works, we're going to begin very quickly to move that prototype into a larger scale effort that can serve many more learners more quickly. We have a colleague actually, Dwayne Matthews, who retired from Lumina last year, and I think he summed up that redesigned post-secondary system best by this one quote: "Everything about pursuing a post-secondary credential should be easy except the learning." That's what we want to get to. When we talk about pathways, and I think, Tom, this is what we mean when we talk about getting students on a guided pathway. When we talk about structured scheduling, when we talk about time being the enemy, when we talk about affordability, we want everything that a student needs to get that credential to be easy. Let's take away those challenges and those obstacles. The learning should not be easy, but those obstacles need to be eradicated so that students can focus on the learning. And I have to attribute that to Dwayne, so please let him know that I did. The next scaling standard was evidence. Clearly, we believe in evidence at Lumina Foundation. Our Goal 2025, was based on some early evidence from our colleagues at the Georgetown Center. Some additional evidence is that by the year 2020, there will be 55 million jobs that require some post-secondary training beyond high school. Another piece of evidence: since the recession, 99% of the jobs that have become available as a part of the recovery have required some post-secondary training and education beyond high school. Only 1% of the jobs have gone to individuals who have had a high school diploma or lower. Now, that's the macro argument. And since we developed the goal at Lumina, our case has been made around the talent development pipeline. The nation needs additional talent. In order to produce that talent, we need to get individuals to have these high-quality post-secondary credentials. And that is a very important piece of it. But in addition to that macro-level argument, we can't forget about the individual people and the individual lives behind the numbers. Now, I'm a data person, and I love a good statistic as much as anybody else. But what this work comes down to are the people, the individuals whose lives have the possibility to be transformed when they have the opportunity to obtain these post-secondary credentials. People like my mom, who went back to school when I was 6 months old and got her bachelor's degree 8 years later, but she persevered. And because she did that, it is a foregone conclusion that my children will take the same path and pursue a college diploma. So when we're thinking about that macro talent development argument, we can't forget about the micro argument. And I promise you, this is as data wonky as I will get, but I think that this is an important one. This slide shows what happens to people who are born in the poorest of the poor in terms of income What happens to them if they do get a college degree, and what happens to them if they don't get a college degree? So if you break out income levels by quintiles, so into 5 categories, and you look at people who are in the lowest of those 5 quintiles, the blue bar shows outcomes for people who started out in the lowest income quintile and do not get a college degree. What is their likely outcome? Well, 65% of those individuals who start out in the lowest income quintile and don't get a college degree are likely to end up in one of the 2 lowest quintiles. So if you don't get a college degree and you are the poorest of the poor, you are very likely to remain poorest of the poor. We know that intuitively, but the data also support that. However, the data also support that if you are born in the poorest of the poor and you get a college degree, that your chances are basically even that you're going to end up in any of those 5 income quintiles, which is really what we say we believe in when we talk about the American dream. And so everything that we say about post-secondary access and opportunity and completion still rings true and proves to be evident in this slide. The next scaling standard was communication. We agree that you have to tell the stories, you have to share the successes, you have to provide good information. But what I wanted to talk about in terms of communication is that you also have to communicate and continuously provide clarification, because there are still some misconceptions about who, and misperceptions about who today's students really are. If I had $1 for every time I had the opportunity to speak to a policymaker, a legislator, on both the state or federal side, and my conversation ends with them talking about, oh, those college kids. Well, the reality is that lots of people who are trying to make their way to a post-secondary credential are not kids. They are people with complex and diverse lives. And so I think that a big part of our communication has to be continuously telling the story of who these individuals are. Nearly 40% are over the age of 25. Many are going to school part-time. Many are struggling just to make ends meet, are working more than 30 hours a week. And here's a statistic that many people don't know. Over 5 million students are themselves parents. And of those students, 60% don't have a single dollar to contribute to their own education. So they are struggling, probably not only to make ends meet, but to try to figure out a way to get the credential that they know is going to make a difference, not only in their life, but for the life of those children that they are trying to support. We have to tell the stories and share the profiles of these students because we need a policy environment that's going to support the college-going ways and pathways of students like these so that they can get the credentials that they need to change the life outcomes for themselves and their families. And I think that that's a very important part of our communication strategy. Policy. I can't be in a room like this with state policy teams, institutional leaders, stakeholders of all sorts from 40 states, and not talk about the importance of policy interventions and levers on both the state side and institutional. And I want to start by talking about some of the real successes that I've seen in leveraging state and institutional policy to achieve incredible gains in student outcomes. I didn't want to go there yet, so let me talk about the successes first, and then I'm going to talk about some things we need to work on. The successes. States that have put credit caps on the number of credits needed to pursue a degree. How many of your states have done that? I want to just applaud you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The credit creep is an incredible drag on student success. When you see a student who is in a program that requires 60 credits to get an associate's degree, and that student has 94 credits, for example, or 102 credits, and they are just meandering their way through a community college, and it does not make any sense. A policy intervention could be the solution. Now, I am not one to say that legislation is always the right answer, but sometimes it can help support student success. So those credit caps have been incredibly helpful in many ways. Institutional efforts around co-requisite remediation that are supported by data that suggests that many students who start in developmental education actually would do just as well if they took the co-requisite course at the same time. These interventions that have been scaled and have been able to reach significant numbers of students and to get them on a pathway to success much more quickly have proven to be incredibly successful. However, there are some policy efforts that have actually prohibited the success of many students, and I think that in the next iteration of our completion efforts, we have to be uncompromising about getting a handle on these things. And so I very quickly just want to mention 3 areas where I think we can do some work. Now, some states are making progress, and we need to learn from those states. But when we continue to hear stories about our military veterans who have gained incredible experience and expertise from the training and service that they have provided to our country from their military service, and then they are not able to translate that training into a validated credential when they leave the service, that's a problem. And so what can we do as state policy leaders and as institutional leaders to ensure that that doesn't happen anymore? So if a military veteran can prove to you, can demonstrate that he or she has the expertise needed, can we validate that learning and move them along the pathway so that they can get the credential more quickly? Secondly, all of the work-based training that happens throughout the country, all of the dollars that go into work-based training, how can we shore all of that up, translate that training into competencies that can be recognized by our post-secondary institutions, get many more individuals onto a pathway to a recognized credential? And finally, and I'm just learning more about this area, this is a new area to Lumina, but I do think that this is something that we are going to have to take on as policy and institutional leaders. Because there are, every year, over 600,000 individuals who are released from prisons and jails back into our communities. And if we do not want these individuals to be a drag on our communities, but we want these individuals to be contributing citizens, and they have the potential to do so, we have to ensure that they have the opportunity also to have skills, training, and high-quality post-secondary credentials. Something that I've just learned, and we're going to be doing some work in this area, is that there are some institutions that can actually offer education, post-secondary education, to inmates when they are in prison, and then they will not accept those students when they are released from prison. So there are policies that are not just, they're just unjust, right? And so we are going to be doing a bit of an expose. We're going to be taking off the mask on these policies across the board, not just for incarcerated individuals, but what are the policies that just don't make any sense? And if we could get a handle on these things, and if we could work with some states that were willing to raise their hands and say, we'll do it, we'll take a look, then we could really have some exemplars to show to other states around the country. Tom, how am I doing on time? I just have one more, and I wanted to group these two together because this is the big finish. Okay. Alliance and equity. I would say more than any of the other scaling standards, these are the two that are at the core of Lumina's work and that are really serve as the foundation of our state policy work. We can't do anything at Lumina without our partnerships. Without partnerships with organizations like Complete College America, one of our dearest and most trusted partners. And we certainly can't do it without our state partners. We have been in the business of working with states since 2007. Some of you might remember the productivity work and the grants that we awarded as a result of that productivity work. As we look at the next generation of our state policy work and the next generation of our new strategic plan, what we have decided we are going to be uncompromising about is our commitment to closing equity gaps. And that commitment is going to come in the form of a new partnership that some of you may have heard about on Wednesday because we announced it at the SHIO meeting. But I'm going to say a little bit more about it here. What we decided when we released our new strategic plan is that we were going to make the implicit explicit. We had an equity imperative that we talked about and that we were committed to, but what we've said now is that equity isn't a component of our work, equity is our work. There is no way we're going to get to goal 2025 unless we get really serious about equity. And when we say equity, we mean closing racial gaps, we mean closing gaps by ethnicity, we mean paying attention to groups that have been historically underserved, we mean paying attention to low-income populations. And we aren't afraid to say those things. We also know that sometimes, because we are a foundation, we can help to set the agenda. And we can also offer cover to states. And so perhaps this is something that your state is thinking about, but when you have the opportunity to compete for a grant, all of a sudden something that was a little lower on the priority list might become a higher priority. And that's fine with us too. And so what we're doing now, and we are really excited about this work, is launching what we call the Talent, Innovation, and Equity Partnership, whereby we will be working with a few states who are willing to commit in a very public way to close their gaps in equity attainment. Now, I'm sure that we've all heard the saying that the only constant in life is change. Well, I don't think that's true, because another constant are these long-standing equity gaps that have existed since we started measuring graduation rates, since we started measuring attainment rates. I was going to put a slide up here on the equity gaps, but you all know what they look like. They haven't changed. They're the exact same. They are pervasive, they are enduring, they are evident across all states. Now, some institutions have gotten a hold on this, but even states with very high attainment rates have huge, gaping equity gaps. And so what we've decided to do at Lumina is to launch this TIE initiative. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Scott Jenkins. Raise your hand, Scott. Scott is our Director of State Policy at Lumina Foundation. And TIE, maybe with a little bit of my urging around equity, but Scott was the brainchild behind TIE. What we've said is we are going to provide grants of up to $500,000 to states that commit to work in a very intentional way on closing their gaps in attainment. They're going to set goals around closing their gaps in attainment. They are going to develop a plan to do so, and they're going to bring stakeholders of all sorts to the table to make this happen. This isn't something that can only happen with higher education at the table. We have to have workforce players at the table. We have to have the governor's office invested in this. We have to have community partnerships at the table. Quite frankly, there might be a time where we say, we need someone from our Department of Corrections at the table. We need to think innovatively about this. This year, we're going to launch with up to 4 states. We will have an another cohort next year. And Scott says we're only going to have 2 cohorts, but who knows? Maybe this will take off, and maybe there will be so many states who commit to this that we will need to have more. But one thing is for sure, we know that this is something that we have to be uncompromising about. And we believe that there are some states that are willing to step up to the plate and to partner with us to do this work. Not because there's so much to lose if we don't do it, but because we believe there's so much to gain if we do. So thank you very much.